Hey, what's going on, you guys? It's 4th of July. I'm at home, and you know, I haven't posted much other than what's going on as far as my professional life. Stuff about real estate. I know today's supposed to be a day of celebration. For most Americans, and with everything going on, it's for me at least. It's really hard to celebrate. Today. I know. A lot of Americans, and this might be a little bit more presumptive, but today's a day where a lot of people don't know the history. They don't really understand the history of the day of Fourth of July, and really for them or for most, again, I'm being presumptive and maybe a little bit general, but it's a day where they run to Costco, they grab as much stuff as they can. They head to the beach or the park or someone's house, and they just they raise their beer, or whatever you're drinking, and say Happy Fourth of July. People are hugging and kissing each other. It just seems like another general day for people to celebrate each other. Without much context. I feel like without knowing what the history of the holiday is. And with everything going on in this world today, I think that's a little bit unfortunate. And I'm by no means a historian, by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not a political reporter or anything like that, but I do at least try to stay as informed as I can. I feel like a big part of that is our civic duty as Americans. It's easy, I think, to and I'm guilty of it myself. I've been doing this with the whole COVID thing going on, and with all the Black Lives Matter stuff. I've been kind of silent behind, and just kind of focusing on my own business. Really just kind of having the that really doesn't relate, or it doesn't have any impact on my life type of attitude. I've tried to stay away from media, social media, as much as I can. Watching the news. I often get text messages and emails of people saying, "Hey, did you see this and did you see that?" And I just haven't. I just haven't. It's just in large part not because I don't care, but because it's sad. It's really sad what's going on. If you look back again at the history, if we're gonna have any, and this is not just for kind of what's going on, socially in our country and politically, but in any case, if you even in fashion, if you look at anything, if you want any indication of kind of where the world or that industry or whatever you're looking at is headed, it's important to have some sort of grasp of the history of where it came from. And so, again, I'm no historian by any means, but given that it is July 4th, I've kind of gone down this rabbit hole of studying U.S. history. Just coincidentally, the fact that today's 4th of July, but over the course of the last couple of months, I've been kind of kept to myself, and working on the house, and I've been doing a lot of reading and listening to U.S. history, because I wanted to understand. It's I guess it's easy to, and it's real dangerous, and I'll kind of get to the point here in a little bit. But when you have a single source of information, such as the internet or the news or the TV, it's very easy for someone. It's almost impossible for someone to have an individual thought process, a process in which someone kind of digests what's going on their own. It's oftentimes swayed, or it's influenced, right, by whatever source of information that is, whether it be a news article, a blog, TV show, a Netflix special, whatever it is. I think because there's so much information now, people tend to latch on to to whatever source of information that they're getting the information from, and that becomes now their rhetoric. It becomes um, their standpoint, and I know this term is kind of caught fire of fake news. Um, but if you take a look, I mean, there's so much information out there that has questionable resources. I mean, sources. And as far as what source is coming from and how reputable that information is. Oftentimes. When we're hearing reports of stuff, even I mean, just a recent example of the George Floyd, the video is very powerful, and I think that's what kind of sparked, or that is the reason why it sparked such global reactions to it, is that because the video doesn't lie. Even in watching something like that, I like to really find out as much as I can. If at all possible, very objectively as to what occurred. Most people didn't know that I've spoken to. Again, this is just in my case, but from the people that I spoke to, most people didn't know that in the George Floyd case, the cop that unfortunately sat over and kneed him in the neck, he had a prior history with George Floyd and working at a club. And they had a very not so good relationship prior to that incident, in which I guess there was some animosity there. So there's a lot more to the story than what's being reported. And even with that incident, I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that. So it's important for us not to just watch a singular video, or watch or look at a singular photo, or read a singular article, especially on the internet, because again, we're not sure of what the sources are, and for that to be our entire rhetoric as to what our beliefs are. We're all entitled to our own opinion. We have the First Amendment that gives us the right to, and I think it's beautiful in that it's the only country in which you had that freedom to express how you feel, openly without the dangers of backlash. But it's a double-edged sword, because of the fact that we're able to share our opinions and our thoughts so openly. We have to have, before we open our mouth, or before we start typing, or before we start posting something, we as Americans, and this includes news networks, this includes influencers, right? We have a civic duty to self-police ourselves, so that we're not putting information out there that is biased, and that lacks information. I mean, like I said before, there's a balance there that I think people should understand, because it's so easy for us nowadays. I mean, look at Trump, for example. I mean, he's up at 3 o'clock in the morning tweeting all kinds of shit, and millions and millions of people look at it and read it, and it does impact. It impacts everybody. It impacts everything that's going on, and to him, or to whomever is writing such information, it may just seem like such a harmless thing, right? I mean, it's just a tweet. It's I don't even tweet, but it's limited to a certain amount of characters. But what Trump, along with everyone else, has to realize is that we do have a civic duty to not post stuff that are false, that are blatantly false. If you want to put an asterisk around it and say, hey, this is my opinion, that's fine. But especially for people who have such an influence, I think in particular have more of a civic duty to really monitor and self-police the information that's going out. So yeah, I mean, I know I'm kind of going on a rant here. I really don't have a true purpose for this video, other than just wanting to kind of share what's been going on in my head. Again, I haven't posted much personally. Just maybe stuff that's going on with my the real estate stuff. But yeah, it really is a sad time. Today being July 4th, I'm sure I'm not sure if people are out celebrating because of COVID, but I for myself am taking this time to reflect back on the atrocities that were the last couple of months, especially, and in general the last couple of years. It really. My parents and my family came to the United States in 1989. I was 5 and my sister was 4, respectively. And it's the unoriginal all-American story. They came here, wanting a better life, wanting more opportunities for their kids, and it's despite of it being an '89 for our family, the mode of transportation being a plane versus a boat. If you look back at the history, um, everybody that's American came here from a different land. You know, it was it started off as European colonies. I mean, you talk about the Midwest and the West; it didn't even exist as far as the U.S. The Spanish actually were the first to come here. That were the first foreigners. They landed in the Caribbean looking for obviously what they thought was India, which is false. I mean, that's not where they landed. So really, if you want to talk about whose land this is, and again, this just goes back to basic history, it's the Native Americans. They're really the true Americans. If you want to go back and get technical, everyone else are immigrants. And even if you look at that, the origination of that history of what America is today, a mixing bowl of people, of religion, of heritage, of culture. That is what is American, and I think because of the white dominated origins of this history, I think there's a tendency when you think American to think of someone who's a white, perhaps Republican, but really the term American means anybody who came here for a second chance. So to see a lot of these political policies, being even considered as far as, I've heard of some stories where, there were, people that have been born here, their parents have been here for 30 plus years, and now, there's talks about them being deported. I'd fall into that category, and I identify myself 100% as American. I mean, I look and feel obviously South Korean because that's where my origins are from, but as far as my nationality, as far as my identity, I mean, really, I consider myself full American, and growing up, that was a huge thing. That was a thing of pride. I remember, as comical as it sounds, again, I'm not sure if this was my mom's intent or not, but I have photos of when I was in grade school. Oftentimes, when I was in grade school, I had a white T-shirt with just an American flag. I mean, it didn't have any words. It just had the American flag. I don't know. Looking back on it, did my mom want me to assimilate that bad into the American life that we, so desperately wanted? I think so. It may not have been. It just may have been a T-shirt for sale that my parents got. But yeah, it's really sad when you start hearing about, now don't get me wrong. We should and ought to have a policy in place to where you can't just freely, cross borders without some sort of process. There should be some system in place to where you can do it and you can do it legally. But to cut off all borders, that in and of itself, I think, is very un-American, especially because of how this country was founded. So I mentioned before, this wasn't our land to begin with. I mean, I'm here in Hawaii. This was not American. I mean, this was not a white settled place. Initially, these were. This is in large part still the Hawaiian land. You look at places like Alaska. You look at places like the Caribbean. You look at mainland the U.S. I mean, this was not Europeans. As kind of the way we see it. I really challenge you to go find someone here in America that's a purebred I mean, I don't know, 23andMe, I don't, whatever that website is evidence of it. There really isn't anyone here in America that's 100% English, 100% German, 100% French. Everyone's a mix. A lot of people that I know that are predominantly Caucasian have some sort of Native American blood. And why is that? Because if you look back at the history, there was a lot of bloodshed between the Native Americans and the Europeans, right? That ultimately came here and settled. They inevitably, through conquering and to capture, I mean, back then, when they were protecting their land, right? The Native Americans, they used to be hunters and gatherers. They used to freely graze on the plains of America, and that's how they lived. They were nomadic. They followed the herds of the buffalo, and that's kind of the idea of today of there being of massive major cities that people choose to move to and settle for decades or maybe the rest of their life was a very new concept for how America was founded. The Native Americans, they were nomadic. They were mobile people. They moved every so often with the herds of the buffalo. The buffalo counted in the millions, before they were basically eradicated or reduced down to the numbers that we have today. That was a way of life. That was the source of food. That was a source of wealth. That was a source of tool building, of resources. There was so much that the buffalo provided the Native Indians. As soon as the settlers came in and started taking over the land, they used to kill millions of these buffaloes, which essentially eliminated or disallowed their way of living. It's a very bloody history. If you read up on it at all, the Comanches, of course, were the most recognized Native Indian tribe that was kind of the last standing Native Americans before they were basically forced into assimilating to the Western culture. But yeah, I mean that's essentially where, and I know we're a couple months early from it, but when the settlers came and they ended up in the areas of Virginia and Boston, they ended up settling in colonies. They had a really good initial relationship with the Native Indians, and that's where we get today's Thanksgiving. The Native Americans would, they weren't evil people. You look at a lot of the history and you see the Native Indians with bows and arrows and scalpings and a lot of bloodshed, but they were quite peaceful, and that's the whole origin of Thanksgiving. The whites and the Native Americans would come together and have a 3-day feast, and having a dinner together to kind of give thanks for the Native Indians helping the settlers to build these colonies, to farm tobacco, So it there's a lot of mixed kind of history as far as America, and we're seeing it all now kind of at a much more heightened and exacerbated state. Slavery obviously was a big thing. It was a big part of the reason why the Americas prospered so quickly and grew so quickly, and they were basically the source of wealth for a lot of the owners, the settlement owners. The slaves came over in the millions at a point, and to harvest cotton and sugar and tobacco, and that's where a lot of the farmers ended up prospering. And so a lot of the history too. I mean, if you're a white American with German, English, French, Spanish, Native American blood, attributes a lot of the success in here in America or in America, to the African American slaves who had absolutely no choice as to whether they're going to come here or not. I mean, they were forced into displacing from their original country of Africa to this new and foreign land, and they were used as slaves, as basically animals. You know, it wasn't until after they came in, the political progression of everyone's ideology of slavery and the ownership and the identity of them being actual human beings, that they allowed them to have three-fifths right as normal humans, and then eventually the right to vote. But it's still, we're still in that process. Is I guess the most important point that I'm trying to make. Slavery was 150, 200 years ago, but the effects of slavery still remain today. And without having at least a basic and elementary knowledge of history, really what we're subject to is just news of what's on our TV or our cell phones, as far as what's going on is happening. It's easy for you to hashtag Black Lives Matter. There's been a lot of talks about influencers, online influencers, and corporations hashtagging Black Lives Matter, and having no context as to why they're doing it, other than wanting more attention or more sales for their company. And I think that's, again, irresponsible. So yeah, as far as what's going on, with the whole Black Lives Matter, if you're going back again, the history, I mean, it was just 30, 40, 50 years ago where the civil rights movement occurred, and will we ever have, full equality? I mean, whether that be, towards the blacks or the Hispanics or the gays or the trans, or whatever, whatever you have, there will never be full equality. And I think that's one thing that that people need to understand, and they need to come to grips with. Full equality, the eradication of racism, is just something that's not going to happen. It's just not. And I don't say that to be pessimistic. I consider myself more of a realist, and the first process, the first step in anything of anything that happens, just psychologically with us, the first step is always denial, right? And I think we have to come to grips with the fact that everybody is, to a certain extent, and maybe kind of falsely identified as being racist, but I think it's more, or more accurately coined, it should be identified as more of a stereotype. Stereotype is a result of kind of the way our brain works, right? If you have something that happens to you once, right, it really doesn't, it doesn't really cement into your brain as now that being something factual, right? If it happens again, then you're kind of more inclined to think, okay, maybe that's the way things are, right? If it happens again and again and again, our minds naturally want to make that connection, and it's called classical conditioning, right? If something happens over and over again, then now that becomes a part of our belief system, right? That becomes kind of what defines our fears, the things that make us happy, our rhetorics when we talk to people, and our opinions. That's in the root of it, kind of what identifies who we are as far as our opinions. So I think it's more of a classical conditioning that we're being exposed to. And that, I think, in terms of the social economical impact that we have, and the political viewpoints, is stereotyping. And stereotyping is not a negative thing. It's an inherent thing, and something that's inevitable in human beings, and the faster and the quicker we accept that, I think the quicker we'll be able to make any sort of change towards finding a resolution. A lot of you guys might think, oh, he's a pessimist. He doesn't think, this will ever resolve itself. It will not resolve itself in its entirety. The only thing we can plan to do is make things better, make things more civil, make things more respectable. But as far as eradicating racism or stereotypes, for one, it's not possible. Okay. The second, we're trying and we're reaching for a goal that's unachievable. Okay, which will only and inevitably lead us to disappointment, right? Which I think is a lot of what we see today. So as far as the police, Black Lives Matter thing, in a nutshell, what do I think? Not that you fucking asked, but there's got to be a sense of, there's got to be programs in play. I know people are saying defund the police. Okay, I mean, you think about this. Okay, you think about this in an actual real life situation. Okay, and I'm not playing the side of pro police or anti police. That should not even be a question that comes up. Okay, there's no one in America or any civilized society that should be anti police. You know what I mean? If you're getting robbed or there's someone out there that has a hacksaw or a machete that is going to kill you, okay, you don't get down on your knees and pray that that perpetrator, that person's going to go away. Okay, you pick up the phone and you call the police, right? And they show up at a reasonable time, and hopefully they resolve the issue. So to say to defund the police and in some places people are saying get rid of the police entirely, it's just for me, for lack of a better term, it's just stupid. It's retarded. It's so stupid of an idea. I think people are quick to say these things, and these things gain traction, right? I mean, hashtag defund the police. I mean, can you imagine society without a police force? So it's not really, or it's not at all, the idea of whether a question of whether we need a law enforcement, presence or not in our communities. It's a matter of leadership, as far as what and how the law enforcement community kind of views their roles, right? I mean, when you're given a gun and a badge, and I'm kind of alluding to myself in a lot of ways here because I used to work in law enforcement. When they give you a gun and a badge after what I believe is very, very inadequate training, it inherently, as a human being, you're giving someone, you're just basically handing that kind of power on a silver platter. There's no, again, 99.9 out of times out of 20, out of 100, you're going to have, police officers that are there to serve and to protect the community in which they serve. You're going to have police officers that are, there not for the money, just like teachers, but there to make a difference in their communities. But you're going to have some people inherently, because of just the probability alone, that are bad apples, and you're going to have someone like a George Floyd, situation. But it's up to the leadership, whether it's at a local, a state, a federal level, or even within the police force, to really instill and enforce this ideology, this principle of being able to protect and serve the community which it serves. Not being this militia group. You often see police forces in America where you can't really distinguish whether they're police officers or the military. You don't know if they're the National Reserves or if they're local cops. They've militarized themselves, and it creates a massive psychological gap between the communities in which they serve and the position that they're in. We have a military to fight our enemies, foreign and domestic. We have a military force for that. We have the Navy, we have the Coast Guard, we have the Marines. The police is something that is entirely different. They handle civic matters, and oftentimes, especially now, those two kind of levels of law enforcement has blended, and there's a massive impact on that, on the way people see police officers. They think, they kind of see them more as a militia, and when you put someone in that uniform where you're more militarized, the person behind that uniform feels empowered to assert their power, for better or worse, on other people who are not armed or not in uniform. That's just natural. So in my opinion, how do you solve this issue? Well, you have to get into the community in which you serve, right? I mean, if you're a police officer and you've got, I don't know, 2 square miles of territory, you ought to know kind of who lives there. Who are the troublemakers? Who are the people trying to make the community better? Who's the kind of, if you're in a gang related area, in a lot of places in America, like Los Angeles and New York and DC, if you're policing a certain neighborhood, I mean, get to know who the people are. I mean, who runs the show? I mean, who's the boss? Who are the gang leaders? Who are the troublemakers? And get them on your side. I mean, have them know who you are, not just by face and a name, but really get to know who you are. That community outreach, I think, will go a long way, and I really think it's the only way in which we're gonna be able to better this relationship that we have between the police and the community in which they serve. Now, is it going to happen overnight? Of course not. Of course not. But it needs to start. And I think if there's any discussion as to how this is going to get better regarding this issue alone, it's community outreach. We have to provide more funds, or maybe adjust the allocation of funds, not towards more weapons and such forth, but towards more community programs, so that the community is able to meet and get to know the people that are enforcing the laws. We everyone's guilty of this. So if you think you're not, then you're wrong. Okay. Everyone has a tendency to have a fear or uncertainty about a certain culture, about a certain religion, and fear comes from the fact that you just simply don't know. And is it the responsibility of that person or that culture or that religious group to inform? Sure, in part. But also, if it impacts you negatively and you have fears about certain people, it's also your civic duty to find out more about it. Because ultimately, we are here. If you want to stay in America, you're going to be living next to someone of a different race, nationality, ethnic background, culture, sexuality. You're inevitably going to be in that position. I mean, unless you just run away like a roach in a spotlight from everything and everyone that's different, you're going to have to get to know. And that's really the best and only way that I think that people are going to be able to get over their fears, is because fear is really what it boils down to. I mean, when you if you're walking down a street at 2 o'clock in the morning, and this is again perhaps a poor example, and you see, for example, 2 black people and you don't have any black friends, then, based on your, again, classical conditioning of what you've been taught or have seen in the media, you're automatically going to think, oh shit, like my life is in danger, right? But let's say your best friend's black, or you have a mentor who's black, or you have a professor who's black that you've gotten to build a really good relationship with. That situation and that scenario might be a lot different in the way you react. So what I'm saying in a nutshell is that there has to be, whether it's forced or I don't know, but there has to be some sort of program to where that interaction between 2 different sects of people, again, whether that be religious or culture or ethnic, are in situations where they get to know each other, not just on a surface level and say, hey, I'm Jose, I'm Mexican, I'm Dante, I'm black, but really getting to know each other as people, because ultimately it doesn't matter. And in my travels, I've been to probably over 50 countries. In my travels, the one thing that I came away with is no matter where you go, okay, no matter what social, economical status someone is in, no matter what religion, no matter what country or neighborhood, no matter where you are in this world, most people want the same thing. They want to be happy. They want freedom. They want to be able to raise a family. To have the common creature comforts that we're now allowed to have because of the innovations and the progression of humanity. That's what people want. It doesn't matter if you're in South America. It doesn't matter if you're in Southeast Asia, and Africa, and Europe. Everybody in general want the same thing. And I think that some of us think that that's not the case. I mean, when you think of a predominantly black neighborhood in Washington, D.C., in Detroit, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, I think we have a tendency because of the movies we've seen, the rap videos or the news, we automatically, almost for certain, like this false sense of like ego, think we already know what they're all about. They sell drugs, they shoot each other, and that's just the way they are. It's not true. It's not true. It What's going on in those neighborhoods, and I know because I've seen it. I used to live in Washington D.C. That is a result of the social economical position that they have inevitably and unfortunately have been forced into. In a lot of these situations, you have to change. You have to kind of follow the money trail, right? Here in America, if you look at the national spending of our budget, in terms of national security, you look at the allocation of taxes for education, for road building. I mean, you look at the budget that America, essentially our tax dollars are going to and how it's allocated. Almost ubiquitously, the funding for education is the first to go. And if you defund education and the salaries of teachers, and then these areas are the hardest hit. So when they start to defund education, it's not the nice neighborhoods that are getting money pulled from them. It's the poor areas. It's the ghettos. It's you go to a lot of these challenging areas in America, and these little pockets of challenged areas in America, and there are buildings after schools that are shut down. So if education statistically is kind of the antithesis, it's the tool in which people use to get out of that situation, and then you defund and you get rid of it. There is a very low glass ceiling, that is set forth for these people, and we all collectively, us as Americans, us as neighbors, as law enforcement, as local, state and federal entities, as governments, we all have a collective role in making sure that doesn't happen. Right now, the way I see it, there's no accountability, there's no leadership, there's a massive lack of leadership. I won't even get down that rabbit hole, but the bipartisan system that we have, that doesn't necessarily, there's no constitutional reason as to why we have a bipartisan system, is allowing this to happen. It mutes. It doesn't allow for the Americans to have a real true voice, I feel like, in matters that are important to our society and the growth. But it is inevitable. You look at history again in brief. You look at the British Empire. You look at a lot of the major the hegemonies of the world, and since humanity began, and they all have a beginning, and they have a peak period, and then they have an ending, and then it's someone else who takes over. I honestly, and as sad as it sounds, as much as it saddens me to say this, as an American, I really do think this is the beginning of the end. As America as a superpower, I really do think the economical progression that China is showing, in terms of their growth, in terms of how fast they've grown in such a short time. I think, again, as much as it saddens me to say, I think really that they're going to be emerging really quickly, and dare I say already, as a world power. So I'm sorry to say that. I know it's 4th of July. We should be celebrating America, but I am deeply saddened and by the recent events of what has occurred, the political climate in which we're forced to be in. It's just sad. It's just sad. And again, I don't post much, kind of speaking my mind. Oftentimes I feel like I should, and I want to, but I don't. But like I said before, we do have the right, with the First Amendment, to be able to do this without backlash. And I hope that you're able to just simply accept my opinions. I'm sure everyone has their own. But yeah, in any case, I didn't mean to dampen everyone's 4th of July. I hope everyone's having a safe weekend. And yeah, I mean, I want to be optimistic, but yeah, I don't know. We're in very challenging times right now. It's so important for us just to be, to kind of take a step back, study our history a little bit, be nice to our neighbors, stop being so greedy. And another dollar for us doesn't mean it's a dollar less. Another dollar for someone else doesn't necessarily mean it's a dollar less for us. We got to get out of the mindset of a scarcity mindset, and I think it's important for us. And I think we have a civic duty to start changing proactively our mindset and the way we look at things, and to stay away from our phones and Netflix and YouTube and news so much, and to sit back and start forming our own ideologies, our own principles based on what we believe from our heart. And the reason that's so important is because as we start to procreate, that'll trickle down to our offsprings. So we absolutely do have a civic duty to be properly informed and to make our own opinions, because that is our future. That is the way that our future will be identified and created. So happy 4th of July, everybody. Thanks for listening to my rant. If you made it this far in the video, we're at close to 40 minutes now. Thank you, and I encourage you to share your thoughts, whether one person views it or 1,000. That's regardless. That's kind of besides the point. It is important for us to voice our opinions. We live in a country, again, where we're able to do that, and to not do that, I think, is doing a disservice to everyone around the world and to our founding fathers who sacrificed so much to give us that right. So anyways, happy 4th of July, everyone. Hope everyone's safe, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.